Hey guys, Chris here. Happy first Sunday of Lent. This is the first milestone on our journey throughout Lent this season, first of many. And, I just hope that you're all having a very penitential and fruitful and spiritually enriching experience thus far. So today I want to do something a little different. Uh, Need to put some content on here so that Tommy's not the only one making videos on our locals. And what I thought was a pretty good idea. I thought let's try like every week to kind of go through the Roman calendar and kind of go over some of the saint feast days that are coming up. I love the saints. I think that there's so much wealth of knowledge in their stories, in what they've done. But it's very easy to kind of lose track of whose saint day is on, when. If you're not going to daily mass, you don't necessarily hear the memorials given. You don't necessarily always hear them anyway. It depends on the priest celebrating the mass that day. So I think it'd be helpful, if each week, you guys could come here on Sunday, and I'll just kind of give you the rundown of the week, whose feast days are coming up, maybe some information about them, why we celebrate them, why they are now saints. And so, yeah, without further ado, let's get started. This week, the first week of Lent, we have nobody. That's right. There on the Roman calendar this week, there are no saint feast days listed. Now, of course, it doesn't mean there aren't saints with feast days. The church just, on the calendar itself, since there'd be so many, we have so many thousands of saints, maybe even millions, that it would just, be impossible, obviously, to have that all on, one calendar. Because then, who do we celebrate on one day? So the church just kind of condensed it down to certain feast days. It condensed it down even more with the post 1969 calendar that we currently use. So just on that calendar for this week, there are no saint feast days, but we're not out of luck just yet, because in addition to the general Roman calendar, there's also the Roman Martyrology, which has a list of all the martyrs, who have given their lives over the centuries for the Catholic faith, and each day has many, 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 many martyrs listed on there. You don't necessarily hear about them as much, but they are there. Like I said, the church has been around so long that we have so many saints and so many martyrs that every day there's a whole laundry list of people. So I decided for this week, since there's nobody on the official Roman calendar, that I dive into that. I picked three. There's a lot of great options to choose from, but I figured these three, I think, are kind of a good start to kind of get us into who's coming up this week, and what kind of heroes of the faith do we have to look forward to. So without further ado, we can get started here. The first one, and I'm going to keep looking over to my other screen, which has my notes on it. So if you see me looking over, that's what I'm looking at. The first one is Saint John Ogilvie. He was born in the year 1580 near Keith in Scotland. Now, if you know anything about the 1500s in Europe, that was when the Protestant Reformation really kicked off. 1517, we had Martin Luther posting, as the story goes, posting the 95 Theses on the door of Wittenberg Cathedral, but that's probably apocryphal. He just released the theses. He probably didn't actually post them on the door in that dramatic fashion. But whether or not he did or did not, it's kind of besides the point. The Reformation kicked off starting in 1517, and over the next years, the next decades, throughout Europe in different kingdoms, you really had a sundering of Christendom in this time period. You had kings and dukes and cities and nations throwing off the Catholic faith and kind of embracing their own versions of Christianity. You had Luther himself and Lutheranism. You had John Calvin down in Geneva, Huldrych Zwingli, and then John Knox in Scotland, which kind of will play into kind of the story of St. John Ogilvie. So St. John was born, as I said, in 1580. His father was a Calvinist. Since about the year 1560 is when kind of Scotland started kind of going down their own branch of Protestantism. The Church of Scotland decided on kind of more of a Presbyterian structure with Calvinist doctrine. So his father was a nobleman, Walter Ogilvie. He was a Calvinist, and St. John was raised in that faith. However, his father sent him to be educated in continental Europe. So by age 17, he actually found himself in Leuven in Belgium, and it was here that he actually decided to convert to Catholicism. He was baptized, or I guess not baptized. I'm not sure if they did baptisms in the Church of Scotland at the time. But one way or another, he converted to the Catholic faith in 1596 at the age of 17. And, he immediately decided to start studying in Catholic universities. He spent some time with the Benedictines, however, quickly decided that the Jesuits was where he wanted to commit his life. So he became a Jesuit in 1597, started training with them, and was officially ordained in the year 1610 in Paris as a priest in the Society of Jesus. Around this time, there was brutal persecutions of the Catholic Church going on in Scotland, as the Church of Scotland was trying to really solidify its power. So they were looking for volunteers to go preach, go be missionaries, secret missionaries to the Catholics who were still remaining in Scotland. So, being Scottish himself, St. John, immediately decided, hey, I'll go. I'd love to go back, help my people become, stay in the faith or become Catholic again. So he returned home in the year 1613, and he worked underground as a missionary in both the cities of Edinburgh and Glasgow, dodging, the infamous priest hunters, which were kind of the agents of the monarchy, agents of the church that were going around trying to find the secret Catholic priests who were saying masses around the countryside. And if you want to see a really good book that has a lot more information on this, I highly recommend Autobiography of a Hunted Priest by Father John Gerard. This actually goes over Father John Gerard's, he was a priest in Elizabethan England, so not quite Scotland, a little farther south, but, the same types of things were going on. The Catholic faith was persecuted, so the priests were, running for their lives or hiding from the state. So really great book. And, Father Gerard spent some time in the Tower of London, where he was tortured, but, held firm to his faith. So yeah, if you want more information, I would suggest reading that book. But going back to St. John Ogilvie, so during this time, this year that he was ministering in Scotland, he brought many people back into the faith. However, somebody who he had brought into the church, as the story goes, actually betrayed him. And on 14th of October, 1614, he was arrested by the authorities. And he was imprisoned and tortured brutally and, kind of pressed to give up the names of other Catholics that he knew that he was working with. However, despite being, put under very brutal tortures, like many, like nights in a row where he was deprived of sleep, dragged around the prison, prodded with sharp sticks, and then also just had his hair pulled out. Just all this brutal stuff that was being committed against him to get him to kind of give up the other Catholics that he knew, the other priests, the other faithful. But despite all of that, he held firm, and is recorded with saying to his captors, your threats cheer me. I mind them no more than the cackling of geese. It just kind of goes to show kind of the staunch will that he had amidst these brutal persecutions. So he's put through a series of trials. He's put on trial by the court, and each time just refused. Despite kind of mounting more and more tortures. Between these trials, he refused to give up names. Refused to kind of say who he knew, who was Catholic. And finally, at his last trial, he's recorded with saying, "In all that concerns the king, I will be slavishly obedient. If any attack his temporal power, I will shed my last drop of blood for him. But in the things of spiritual jurisdiction which a king unjustly seizes, I cannot and must not obey." It's a very brave stance. It reminds me very much. I'm sure you're thinking of it too if you're familiar with the story of St. Thomas More. The one of the things he said before he was executed was, "I remain His Majesty's faithful servant, but God's first." Just this idea that I respect the king in all that he has authority of, in the temporal power that he has, but I ultimately owe my allegiance to God and to the faith. And, if those are in conflict, well, then the things of God are kind of what I'll order my life towards. So he was condemned to death as a traitor since he would not give up the names, and he was hanged in the city of Glasgow on 10th of March, 1615. He was canonized by Pope St. Paul VI in 1976, so he actually went a while before he was kind of officially canonized. And he was actually the first Scottish saint since the year 1250, and also the only recorded martyr that we know of from Scotland itself. So his feast day is March 10th, the day that he was martyred on, and just a really kind of courageous and stalwart man. Now, the next saint, we know a bit less about. He is from the other side of the world, is St. Joseph Zhang Dapeng. So St. Joseph was born in 1754 in Douyin in China. So he's a Chinese saint. He was raised a Buddhist, as many were in China at this time. He moved to the city of Guiyang in 1794, and he entered the silk business. So he was a silk merchant. He became very successful, in this city, throughout the years. He was introduced to Christianity by somebody who came in contact with through his business. However, and he had the interest of converting to Catholicism. However, he was unable to do that because he had a concubine, which, basically is a woman who he was not married to. However, he had relations with. So, in some societies, that's like a second, third, fourth wife, or just kind of, somebody of a lower status, who you're having relations with, but do not have any kind of sacramental connection to. So because of that, the church said that he was not able, they wouldn't let him enter kind of the catechism program. However, he still really wanted to become a Christian. So by the year 1800, he decided to part from his concubine, renounce that. And despite, all of his business associates, all of his close family, despite all of their protests, he made the decision, no, I'm going to convert to Catholicism. And he was baptized in 1800. And he chose the name Joseph as his baptismal name. So that's why he's known as Saint Joseph Zhang Dapeng. So because his business, a lot of his businesses, his business connections started to dry up a bit, with this new faith. He decided to attribute a lot of his life to preaching and teaching out of his own home, and he became a Catholic catechist, teaching and instructing many in the faith. However, due to this, he ran afoul of this group called the White Lotus cult, and actually it looks like it was his brother-in-law who sold him out to this group. So the White Lotus cult, just gave you a bit of background. They were a sect of Buddhism which had been around in China for many hundreds of years, it looks like, in kind of in different forms. In the 1100s, I think 1200s, they started out, and just throughout the centuries, they were kind of this group that existed, and sometimes gained more followers, sometimes lost some, but was kind of always present, kind of in Chinese society. And by the late 18th into the early 19th century, the White Lotus cult became a bit of a problem for the ruling Qing dynasty, which was made up of people of the Manchus. So Manchus were kind of like a nomadic people from Manchuria, which was northern present-day China, but at that point, before then, hadn't really been part of China. So they were ethnically distinct from the normal Han Chinese people. So due to this, this White Lotus group, they didn't really like foreigners very much. So they had a lot of problems then, you can imagine, with both the Qing dynasty, but also with Catholics, and the kind of the influence of this other religion, from Europe. So due to this, the White Lotus cult between 1796 and 1804 kind of revolted against the Qing dynasty, but they also had a lot of power, and due to this, Saint Joseph was imprisoned by them, because they didn't like Catholics also, and he was put in prison, and while he was in prison, he was imprisoned with Saint Peter Wu Gosheng, another Chinese martyr from the similar time period, and both of them in prison together ministered to many of the prisoners, and just kind of lived out their Catholic life despite now being trapped and imprisoned. Saint Joseph was offered his freedom if he renounced the Christian faith. However, as the courageous man that he was, he refused to do that, and was executed on the 12th of March, 1815 in Guiyang. So he was canonized with the other martyrs of China in the year 2000. So again, another recently declared martyr. He was martyred many years ago, but he was declared, kind of officially canonized by Pope St. John Paul II in the year 2000. Again, another fantastically courageous man, and his feast day is the date of his death, March 12th. So the third and final martyr that we're going to go over today is Blessed Francoise Trehet. She was born 8th of April 1756 in Saint-Mars-sur-la-Foutaille in France. I don't know if I pronounced any of that right. Probably completely butchered that, but it's French, so I apologize in advance. So she was a French martyr. Early in her life, she decided to join the Sisters of Charity, so she was vowed to them, and did a lot of acts throughout her years. Acts of charity, as the order is kind of ordered towards, specifically though working to educate young girls. So in 1783, her and a fellow sister named Sister Jeanne Véron were invited to open a school in the town of Saint Pierre des Landes. Again, another school that kind of ministered to young women, and kind of furthered that cause, I guess. But anyway, So when the French Revolution broke out in 1789, they a lot of a lot of religious were kind of forced to kind of pull back a bit, kind of go into hiding, where they remains until 1794, in February 1794, during the Reign of Terror, which is a infamously brutal period of the French Revolution. You had France in this revolutionary fervor, also at war with basically everybody around them. So there was a lot of fear in France of foreign invasion while they're kind of dealing with this new republic of theirs. So this group known as the Committee of Public Safety basically was tasked with ensuring kind of that enemies of the state were found and rooted out. So you can imagine how they got a lot of power that they shouldn't have had, and this reign of terror, which lasted from about 1782 to 1783, all the way until late 1784, thousands of people were put to the guillotine. Many of them were clergy and priests and religious and laymen who were still faithful Catholics. Sister Francoise and Sister Zhang were amongst those. They refused to recant their faith. They refused to pledge to the French Republic. Sister Blessed Francoise, she was guillotined on 13th March 1794, and it's reported that on her way to the scaffold, she was actually singing the Salve Regina the whole time, which again just kind of shows the deep faith that she brought, kind of to her death. And then Sister Jean was executed a week later. Both were beatified by Venerable Pope Pius XII in 1955, and Blessed Francoise has the feast day of March 13th. So that's about all for today. I hope you learned something. I look forward to doing more of this in the future. There's just so many interesting figures that we have in the Catholic faith. So many, whether they're just martyrs or just saints themselves. It's just so uplifting to see these people just so on fire and so courageous for the faith, especially with the martyrs going through such brutality, and such vicious persecution. So next week we'll pick up with the general Roman calendar itself again. So whatever saints feast days we're coming up, we'll get into. I hope you all have a blessed day, a blessed week, and a very blessed Lent.